Hello everyone and welcome to our first video discussion in Organizational Communication, CMST430. My name is Bill Perkins and today I'll be looking at Chapter 2, Organizational Communication Ethics. There are 5 questions, so let's jump right in. Question 1 asks us to discuss how your vision or view of ethics differ or are similar to those discussed in the text. I think that the ethical matrix on page 45 is accurate for determining if our communication is ethical. It is a good tool for making sure that when we are trying to persuade someone to do or think something, we are communicating in an ethical way. The matrix, though, is focused on determining the ethics of how we persuade or present information. It fails to examine whether what we are trying to convince the receiver of is actually ethical in and of itself. Per the book, good simply equals a truthful and clear message based on the belief of the sender that whatever the message is trying to persuade the receiver to do is good. We need to remember that goodness is subjective and must also be carefully considered. The definition of ethics on page 44 states that it is the critical analysis of cultural values to determine the validity of the vigorous rightness or wrongness in terms of 2 major criteria, truth and justice. Ethics is examining the relation of an individual to society, to nature, and or to God. This means we have to examine the way that we determine if something is right or wrong in our actions, thoughts, and beliefs by vigorously questioning if they are right or wrong by being both true and just. This brings me to question 2. Discuss how your views of ethics have changed over time. Please discuss both points in time when your view of ethics has changed, how they changed, and what you believe your ethical perspective to be now. On page 55, the authors discuss the idea of common sense, which are assumptions about the way the world works based on the culture, time, and place in which we live. We learn from our parents and echo their ethical values at first. As we go on in life, we adopt the ethics of others that we admire, such as teachers, work colleagues, and others we hold in esteem. We learn the values and ideologies of those around us, and these become our common sense, our ethics. I personally grew up in a small town where part of that culture, that common sense, was evangelical Christianity. I began to question those beliefs at an early age and started reading everything I could find about other religions and philosophies. I also studied the occult and metaphysics. Because of this, I was labeled a Satanist, a heretic, a witch, etc., by some of the more fanatical believers in my middle school. They were very vocal and took to their persecution with gleeful energy. This forced me to consider the idea of ethics and how most people based their ethics on cultural and personal beliefs while ignoring truth and justice. I formed my own ethics on provable truths and actions that were equal and just for all. And by the time I graduated high school, I was the worst kind of heretic. An atheist. I think that answers question 2 and tells you a little bit more about me. Now question 3 asks that, based on the text, what are the most important ethical issues you need to be aware of in the workplace? Why is it important? What are the implications or consequences of the issues? And how do you know if this issue is being appropriately handled or responded to? Pages 49 and 50 give a typology of ethical lapses found in most organizations. I think that while these issues can negatively impact the organization from the inside, the real issue has to be how society is negatively impacted by organizations who themselves engage in these behaviors. Stealing, lying, fraud and deceit, bribes, payoffs and kickbacks, hiding versus divulging information, cheating, etc. Large organizations seem to be engaged in one or more of these behaviors on an almost constant basis. All of these have huge negative impacts on society and civilization. They create inequality, environmental crisis, a market that is top-heavy, budget shortfalls for communities and governments, and the loss or retardation of technologies and innovations that may have had positive impacts for society, but were deemed unprofitable for the organization in either the short or long term. We hear about these issues frequently when large organizations get caught or go bankrupt. However, we're only seeing the tip of this iceberg, and it will not be handled or responded to as long as organizations have the ability to bribe politicians with campaign donations and future forms of remuneration, which in itself is unethical. With the end of that public announcement, political ideology, let's go on to question 4 that asks, based on reading your case study, what ethical issues do you see present in the case that were also discussed in the text? Be clear, specific, and cite both the case and text. Identify at least 5. The real-world case study on page 61 is interesting, but I'm not so sure it rises to the level of an ethical dilemma. I suppose you could possibly say that using Redding's typology of unethical communication on page 57, Bloomberg Businessweek's cover was destructive, that it engaged in what could be considered an insult or derogatory joke aimed at the airlines. However, I think you have to look at the intent. If an insult or derogatory joke is intended to highlight or reveal a deeper truth about the subject, is it actually unethical? While some people may find it objectionable, if at its core it is truthful and just, I don't think it's unethical. Using Anderson's 3 viewpoints for ethical communication, we can break the issue into 3 parts: source ethics, receiver ethics, and society ethics. Source ethics, the intent of the source, in this case the publisher, towards the receiver, the reader, was to grab attention and portray the upcoming merger as something dirty, secretive, and messy. This is how culturally we perceive sex. We also see sex as one of the entitlements in a marriage/merger. The publisher was being truthful in his representation of the merger between United and Continental, based on his knowledge and belief of what was occurring. Therefore, he had good intent and good ethics. The receiver ethics, the receiver must actively listen in order to critically judge and evaluate the message, so as to either ask for more information, reject or accept the message, or even to act upon it. The receiver has to be objective and not just make snap judgments. Some of the receivers, had a snap reaction to the image. They ignored the message that the source was sending, instead focused only on the fact that 2 airplanes were being shown engaged in coitus. Their cultural abhorrence for any portrayal of the sex act was the immediate concern. There is also a cultural idea that business is somehow sterile and clean, while sex is not. They did not judge the message based on the truthfulness or if it was just in its treatment of the airlines. Instead, they judged it based on a cultural belief. They did not react in an ethical manner. Society ethics, how the third party, in this case the rest of society, who saw the image and possibly heard some of the upset responses, reacted to the message. I would suggest that the rest of society either agreed with the message itself and the source's intent, or simply did not care that some readers or viewers found the image distasteful, as the magazine does not seem to have suffered any real long-term negative impact. I would suspect that Bloomberg Businessweek's continuing use of images that could be considered offensive culturally in order to grab attention and highlight a situation in a satirical fashion, by itself proves that the opposite is true, and they are seeing a positive impact on the number of readers and profitability. And our final question, number 5, continues the discussion about our case study and asks, applying the text, how might the ethical issues be addressed in such a complex case? Question makes me wonder if I'm reading the right case study or if there is a different one. The only ethical issue I found was that the receivers were not being objective and instead reacting out of a culturally ingrained feeling or belief that has no basis in truth or justice. The only way to address that would be to try and educate people, especially when they are younger, on how to actively listen, evaluate, and debate ideas and beliefs without relying on common sense cultural perceptions. Well, that's the end of our 5 questions. Thank you for joining me as I discussed Chapter 2 in organizational communication. Hopefully the next video will be even better. Have a great day.